The peace ceremony was supposed to be beautiful. That was the word the Varelian architects used when they built the Hall of Accord beautiful. 1,000 crystalline spires arched above a chamber of light, reflecting peace banners from every known world. The air shimmered with perfume and politics. Every ambassador smiled for the cameras. Every gesture had been rehearsed for weeks. Even the scent cycles in the vents had been calibrated for maximum serenity. At the center of it all stood a boy. Barefoot. Silent. Human. He couldn't have been older than 6, thin, hollow-eyed, wrapped in a faded military jacket that still bore someone else's name. One sleeve was burnt clean through and stitched crudely with plastic thread. He didn't fidget, didn't speak. He just watched the sea of luminous beings before him with the quiet, unblinking patience of something that had already seen too much. From the dais, Consul Erixia of the Varelian Council spread her glass-like hands and spoke, her voice amplified by crystalline walls. Today, we prove that reason is stronger than fear. We take this child born of war and raise him in peace. Let the galaxy see that hate can be unlearned. The hall erupted in light applause, dignified, precise, performative. The boy didn't bow, didn't smile. His reflection stared back at him from 1,000 polished surfaces. A journalist whispered too loudly near the press rings. "It doesn't even know what's happening." The boy's eyes flicked toward the sound just for a moment. It was enough to make the reporter flinch and step back. When the cameras turned away, Erixia knelt to meet his gaze. She tried to smile. "Your name, child?" He hesitated. His lips moved before sound came. "Eli." "Eli," she repeated, as if testing its balance in her mouth. "You are safe now." He looked past her at the banners, the lights, the watching crowds, and asked, "If I learn your ways, will you send for the others?" Erixia blinked. "The others?" He said nothing, just looked down at the floor, at the burn marks still dark on his sleeves. No one in that grand shining hall understood that he wasn't asking for family. He was asking about the species. Eli Graves was 6 years and 28 Earth weeks old when his blood sample was analyzed in the Varelian Biological Systems Center. The technician running the scan noticed the anomaly almost immediately. Elevated cortisol baselines, adaptive hormone cycling, stress enzyme thresholds that matched war-bred environments. "This boy should be in cardiac failure," the tech muttered. The medical scans were rerun. Twice. Each time, the results came back the same. His nervous system showed early signs of hyperplastic reinforcement neurons developing rapid-firing redundancy loops. The kind seen in emergency response animals. Not typical in human children. "He's not broken," the chief analyst said flatly. "He's conditioned." The report was marked for internal review, then quietly deleted. No one told the council. No one told Erixia. And no one, not even Eli, realized it was the first time they underestimated him. Lissar Prime was the heart of the Varelian core, a city of vertical gardens, light glass streets, and corridors lined with silent air. Peace had not merely been declared, it had been engineered into the architecture. Buildings softened vibration. Lighting followed biofeedback rhythms. Emotional variance was smoothed by scented nanomists. To Eli, it felt like a dream with the air turned off. He was placed in the youth enclave of the council estate, a series of private towers built to raise Varelian offspring. There were no bedrooms, no toys. Children slept in meditation cradles. They studied from encoded prisms. They practiced discipline through stillness drills. Eli didn't cry when he was left there. He didn't ask for his parents. He didn't ask for food. He asked for the name of the instructor in charge. "Master Thalen," the aide replied, sounding amused. Eli nodded and asked for a book on Varelian logic structures. The aide blinked. "We don't teach logic until age cycle 9. Eli shrugged. "Can I still learn it?" They gave him a beginner's primer, not expecting him to retain anything. 2 days later, he quoted the third law of recursive contradiction back to Master Thalen, unprompted, and asked if it was applicable in social negotiation. Master Thalen looked at the human child and said, "You memorized it?" Eli shook his head. "I understood it." The other children didn't welcome him. Varelians did not bully in the human sense. Their disapproval came through precision, Exclusion, no shared networks, no paired exercises, no eye contact. They whispered when he passed. Beastling, crackskin, wildborn. He ignored them. Instead, he listened. When they tripped him in motion drills, he memorized their footwork. When they set his simulation variables incorrectly, he reset them in real time and wrote a better algorithm. When a senior child mocked his accent, Eli corrected the child's own pronunciation of harmonic dialects. He wasn't confrontational. He wasn't defiant. He was exact. That unsettled them more. The first time Eli failed a physical trial, a balance field exercise, he stayed after class and examined the control panel. He asked why the course used a fixed rotation. When the instructor explained it was tradition, Eli requested the schematics. 3 days later, he returned with a revised design. 3 degrees less incline, randomized pulse timing, higher tension yield 17% more efficient. The Council of Youth Development sent a memo to Thalen. The human child is modifying learning environments. Is this permitted? Thalen replied. He isn't modifying, he's optimizing. They didn't understand that distinction. At age 11, Eli entered the strategy circle. It was normally restricted to Varelians in their third maturity phase. He beat every simulation in half the allotted time. His tactics weren't elegant. They were precise, predictive, and lethal. In a final scenario designed to teach delay and retreat, he baited the enemy AI into attacking a decoy fleet, rerouted a solar sail to reflect false ship signatures, and used gravitational drag to slam the enemy into their own minefield. The instructor called it brutality. Eli answered without blinking, "You told me to win." Thalen watched from behind the mirrored wall and said quietly to the observer beside him, "They think he's still a child." The observer, Counselor Nim, folded his arms. "We may have raised a weapon." Or, Thalen said, a warning. The capital of Lissar Prime shimmered under its twin moons when Eli turned 16. By then, the media no longer called him a symbol. They called him the Project. He had outpaced the children, then the adults, then some of the instructors. He didn't brag, he didn't argue, he simply kept learning. He worked quietly as a systems analyst, the position given to him by the council, to keep him included. In practice, it meant cleaning up comm protocols, checking data fluxes, and reading everything that passed through the planetary grid. He read the encrypted dispatches too. And when the Drovek Empire returned burning worlds in their path, he knew, before the council admitted it. They moved slowly, cautiously, politely. Eli didn't. He sent them one message. "Give me the defense grid, I will not fail you." The council didn't answer. But that night, when the Drovek stealth teams landed near the academy, when the guards froze and the power grid flickered, Eli Graves rerouted every circuit from the substation with his own access code, sealed the blast doors, guided 200 civilians through maintenance shafts using nothing but a grease pencil and a hand-drawn map, and waited in the control hub. When the infiltrators reached him, he triggered an electromagnetic vent sequence that arced lightning across the chamber. The Drovek were wearing carbon-shelled armor. They died instantly. The next morning, security footage leaked. The human acted before the council did. And across the galaxy, the question changed from, why did they adopt him? To, what have they created? The day after the Drovek infiltration, Lissar Prime stopped pretending peace was unshakable. The city's skyways, once filled with drifting light crafts and soft classical harmonics, now pulsed with the low drone of military patrols. The Varelians had not heard that sound in a generation. Some found it nostalgic. Most found it unbearable. The council convened an emergency session within 12 hours of the attack. Consul Erixia, now grayer at the edges of her crystalline form, presided. The chamber, usually translucent with serenity, was dimmed for privacy. Even the air processors hummed more harshly, like the room itself disapproved of panic. The Drovek strike was surgical, said Counselor Nim. They aimed for command sectors, not civilians. That means reconnaissance. We are already compromised. Then we rebuild the grid, Erixia said evenly. We respond with logic. Logic will not stop plasma. That was Thalen, standing at the far end of the table. His robes were ash-colored, his eyes steady. It wasn't logic that saved the Academy last night. It was instinct. His instinct. Eryxia's gaze flicked toward him. You're suggesting we entrust our defense to a child? Thalen's mouth twitched in what passed for a Varelian frown. He is 21. To us, still a child, said another. And human. Exactly, Thalen said. That's what you've forgotten. The council chamber fell silent. None of them liked being reminded that their peace was built on amnesia centuries, spent erasing the parts of themselves that once fought and bled. He acted before you even met to discuss the threat, Thalen continued. If he hadn't sealed those doors, Lisser Prime would be dust, and you'd still be writing emotion for appropriate response language. Emotion breeds recklessness, Eryxia countered. And logic without courage breeds extinction, Thalen said. It was the first open argument in the council in 60 years. Eli sat in his dormitory quarters unaware that his name was being thrown around a dozen committee circles. His hands were stained from insulation grease, his forearms wrapped in bandages from mild arc burns. The med unit had wanted to sedate him after the incident. He had refused. The burns stung. That was good. Pain meant he was still alive. The Virelian healer, Dr. Vesson, adjusted the dressing. You sustained second-degree thermal contact. We'd normally recommend full dermal regeneration, but you requested natural recovery? Yes. 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 Human tissue regrowth will take 2 to 3 weeks. Then it will take that long. Vesson tilted her head, the light inside her translucent body shifting faintly. Why choose slower healing? Eli's answer came after a pause. Because I should remember what it cost. Vesson regarded him for a long time, then sealed the bandage. It's strange, we designed this world to remove pain. You seem to find comfort in it. I don't, he said, but it reminds me I'm not numb. When she left, he flexed his fingers slowly. The skin felt tight, raw. It would scar lightly, but he didn't mind. Scars were maps, reminders of where the fire had been. The next week passed in a blur of rumors. The council delayed formal acknowledgement of the Drovek threat. The Varelian media broadcast carefully worded updates. Localized disturbance. Situation contained. The peace endures. But, across the lower sectors, soldiers began drilling again. Most had never drawn a weapon in their lives. They had been peacekeepers, not fighters. Their neural responses were too slow for the speed of modern warfare. So, when the council finally summoned Eli, it was less invitation, more inevitability. He arrived at the council chamber in plain gray uniform, sleeves rolled to the elbows, bandages still visible. He didn't bow. The gesture was human. The Varelians found it odd. He simply nodded once. Eryxia studied him. You disobeyed standing orders by accessing restricted defense grids. I saved your capital, he said calmly. Several counselors flinched at the bluntness. You risk millions of lives, she countered. A human reactor vent isn't a defensive maneuver, it's a death wish. He met her gaze evenly. It worked. Varelians didn't know how to argue with simplicity. They used rhetoric like music complex, layered, endless. Eli's words were a weapon by contrast. Clean, aimed, terminal. You want to punish me, he said, but you won't. Eryxia's fingers tightened against the table's edge. And why is that? Because you need me. Thalen stepped forward from the shadows of the chamber. He's right. You saw the footage. He anticipated a Drovek infiltration 6 hours before we detected the energy spike. Eryxia inhaled sharply. That information was restricted. Not to him, Thalen said. A pause stretched across the hall. The kind that tastes like realization. Eli glanced toward the hollow display flickering behind them, the map of the outer colonies, the burn marks already spreading like bruises across the rim. The Drovek won't stop, he said quietly. You taught me your history. You showed me their tactics from the First War. They never stopped evolving. You did. Eryxia's voice trembled. We achieved peace. By forgetting how to fight. The room fell still. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't gloat. But the truth in his words cut sharper than any weapon. That evening, the council voted to reactivate the planetary defense network for the first time in a century. Eli was assigned as a tactical liaison, a title invented to make his involvement sound symbolic. But when the Drovek fleet dropped out of warp 8 days later, symbols didn't matter. They arrived over Lissur Prime in formation black angular ships, reflecting no light. The first energy pulse shattered the orbital mirrors before the Varelians even initiated shields. In the command chamber, chaos replaced logic. Orders collided, protocols contradicted each other. Eli stepped forward. Divert main power from the art array to defense. A technician hesitated. That would disable the atmosphere mirrors. I know. Do it. The lights dimmed across the capital as energy rerouted through subgrid relays. Eli dragged his finger across the holographic map, recalibrating trajectories. Angle the orbital reflectors to 63 degrees. We're going to turn their own light back on them. That's not how those work, another shouted. It will be. He overrode their protests. Data streams rippled across the display. Outside, thousands of orbital glass mirrors, meant to control sunlight and climate balance, rotated in perfect synchronization. For the first time, they became weapons. The mirrored panels caught the solar light and refracted it into coherent beams. The Drovek ships didn't expect light to burn. Their hulls ignited in silent arcs, splitting under heat stress. The battle lasted 8 minutes. When it was done, nothing remained in orbit except drifting fragments. Inside the command chamber, the Virilians stared at the displays, the casualty count reading 0, the fleet status reading stable. Erixia whispered, "That's not strategy." Thalen, watching beside her, said softly, "That's evolution." Eli turned from the window. "You wanted proof peace made you stronger. It didn't. It made you safe. There's a difference." In the following days, something strange happened across Lissur Prime. For the first time, Varelians began walking faster, speaking louder. Soldiers trained without hesitation. The city's music, once serene, took on rhythm again, sharp and urgent. A symbol spread through the barracks, a white circle painted on armor plates, surrounding a smaller black core, the shape of a human pupil. The soldiers said it meant clarity. They called him Executor Graves. Eli didn't correct them. He didn't want the title. But he knew what it meant to have one. And when Thalen visited him that night in the operations dome, he found him alone, hands still bandaged, staring at the map of the outer rim. "You did what we couldn't," Thalen said quietly. Eli didn't turn. "No, I did what you wouldn't. You saved us." He looked up. "I reminded you what survival costs." His eyes, reflected in the glass, looked almost like theirs, pale, faceted, luminous, but not quite. The light in them still burned warm, human, dangerous. They called it the doctrine of preservation in public records. But in the bunk halls, the academies, and the frontline briefings, it had another name. The human doctrine. It began as a whisper, not a command. After Eli's defense of Lissur Prime, requests flooded in from outposts and planetary governors. They wanted copies of his response model. They wanted his simulations. They wanted to know how a race once deemed instinct-driven, war-prone, and structurally emotional had produced a man who could turn orbital architecture into a battlefield and win without a single loss. Eli did not lecture. He compiled. 2 days later, he submitted a tactical handbook, simply titled Unorthodox Asymmetry, Efficient Response for Disproportionate Threats. It was 712 pages long and contained precisely one reference to Varelian strategy, a quote from the pre-war archives. "Predictability is the death of survival." That was the beginning. Within a month, his manuals had reshaped the Varelian military from glass-polished statues into a functional force. Command centers, once nestled deep within serene metropolises, were broken into node clusters, decentralized, self-healing, and mobile. No more hierarchy bottlenecks. No more committees before firing. All officers underwent tactical submersion, not simply simulations, but full neural immersion into Earth's final battles. New Mumbai, the Arctic collapse, the Shroud campaign. It was trauma by design. Many couldn't finish it. The ones who did came back different. Their reflex times improved by 20%. Their adaptive decisioning rose even higher. And when the Drovek returned 3 fleets strong, Eli gave no orders to intercept. He let them arrive. The Council nearly revolted. "They're in orbit. cried Erixia over the secure line. "We have detected atmospheric entry signatures. This is suicidal." Eli answered from the command post at Istara's fault, a region never built for war, now fortified in silence. His tone didn't rise. "They need to believe they're winning." "You let them land?" "I let them walk into a snare," he said. 3 minutes later, the outer planetary defense grid, preceded with atmospheric lures, ignited. The Drovek fleets hadn't realized their fuel trails rich in ionized trace were being harvested mid-flight. Every ship had been tagged on entry with false navigational data and atmospheric misdirection. They dropped into the upper clouds without knowing they were glowing brighter than a flare. Targeting was simple. The defense satellites never fired. The ships were turned against themselves. Eli's doctrine stated it plainly: you don't meet force with force, you let it collapse under its own assumptions. The Drovek fleet was gone in hours. The war wasn't over, but something had changed. Varelian commanders, once soft-spoken, deliberate, meditative, now studied chaos as a tool. They drilled not to preserve calm, but to survive panic. They trained their citizens not to remain passive, but to act. Eli introduced practical battlefield medicine based on Terran field standards. Blood-clotting foam injections, pressure tourniquets, emergency splints made from modular armor plates. The medics protested at first it was inelegant, crude. Then, a squad survived a Drovek ambush thanks to those crude techniques. A Varelian soldier with a shattered lower femur was stabilized, transported, and healed with minimal loss. The wound site scarred, but no one questioned the efficiency again. Eli also rejected the crystalline trauma suppressors. "Real pain means real data," he told the medical corps. When soldiers began to endure pain instead of mask it, their post-recovery reflexes improved. Coordination across units became less delayed. They anticipated failure instead of fearing it. Some council members protested the ethics. A younger counselor asked him directly during a review hearing, "Why would you expose our people to what broke yours?" Eli looked at her and replied simply, "Because what broke us made us grow teeth." Not everyone accepted it. Small resistance factions formed in the core colonies, Varelians who believed the doctrine was the very violence they had escaped. They called Eli a regression, a relic. Some accused him of exploiting trauma to push a human agenda. They weren't wrong. He didn't deny it. At a diplomatic forum hosted in the capital, a dissenter stood and asked him during a public address, "You claim this is for our survival, but you use human fear tactics. You weaponize memory. What will be left of our peace when this is over?" Eli stood quietly for a moment before answering. "I was 6 years old when I watched orbital strikes reduce a city to ash. I survived under a collapsed building for 3 days before the first Varelian drone arrived. My parents died trying to keep me from seeing it happen." He stepped forward, past the edge of the podium. "I still see it." The chamber was silent. "I remember every second because your peace never erased it. You adopted me to prove you could raise a human in peace, but you didn't raise me. You sheltered me, and in doing so, gave me the tools to fight better than you ever could." He looked at the crowd, voice low but clear. "I am your peace, and I know exactly what it cost." He left the chamber before the applause started. The next day, he was offered 3 things: full Varelian citizenship, permanent command of planetary defense, a seat on the council. He declined all 3. "You built your peace on glass," he said in the debrief. "Now you want me to sit inside it and act like it won't crack again." The counselors were silent. Eli stood. "I'm not what you hoped for, but I'm what you built." Quote, "Noted." Then he walked out. 1 week later, the last major Drovek fleet entered Varelian space. This time, Eli didn't wait for them to strike. He went to them. A forward fleet, composed of modular Varelian ships retrofitted with human-engineered propulsion systems, met the Drovek in deep orbit above the moonless system of Valen 3. The Drovek hailed for surrender within 20 minutes. They had learned what Varelians hadn't dared to teach themselves: that the human they adopted, the symbol of peace, had become their blade. What Eli did next was the final lesson. The Drovek survivors, over 6,000 soldiers, were brought to Lisar Prime. There were calls for extermination, for imprisonment, for sterilization. Eli overruled them all. Feed them, heal them, send them home. The council was stunned. These are the beings that murdered your people, Erixia said. You offer them mercy? No, Eli said. I offer you mercy. The chamber froze. You think peace is something you sign and forget, but peace is a choice made again and again, especially when you have the power to destroy. He leaned forward, voice colder than they'd ever heard. I killed enough to end this war, but mercy is what makes sure the next one doesn't start. No one argued. They couldn't. Because for the first time, they saw it clearly. They had not tamed a human. They had trained one. In the weeks following the surrender, the galaxy held its breath. The war was over. That much was clear. The Drovek fleet, once the looming shadow at every rim border, had vanished. Not through treaties, not through diplomacy, but through defeat. Swift, unflinching, and delivered by a man raised in a world that believed such things were no longer necessary. What remained was far more complicated. The Varelian system stabilized, yes, but not as they had before. The people were no longer untouched. Their military, once a ceremonial institution, had become an active force. Their youth began enlisting, not as pacifists, not as observers, as soldiers. And not for conquest, not for glory, for preparation. Eli Graves became both a symbol and a paradox. Statues were erected of him across 3 core worlds, showing him not with a weapon, but with a pen in one hand and a datapad in the other, the intellect of war. Yet, in the outer colonies, the soldiers painted his circle across their armor and whispered a different name. Executor Graves. To some, he was a savior. To others, a human-shaped reminder that safety could not be eternal. And to Eli himself, he was just a survivor. The council reconvened in private session to discuss what they called the human question. It was no longer political theater, it was existential policy. He has shown restraint, said Counselor Nim, even mercy. He's destabilized everything we stood for, countered another. Our culture has shifted beneath us. Children play war now. Schools have emergency drills. We've built simulation centers. He taught us to survive, Thalen said from the corner, older now, his voice thinner but no less firm. Would you rather we returned to stillness and prayed not to be seen next time? Erixia stood slowly, her translucent hands resting on the edge of the table. The question is not what he did. The question is what comes next. Eli had already answered that question in his own way. He refused the council's offers, one after another. Not just positions or titles, but assets, a personal estate, permanent security, even citizenship honors. He accepted none of it. He lived in a small observatory dome in the low polar region of Lissar Prime, far from the towers, far from the broadcasts. The dome was built for stargazing, but it had become something else, a school, a sanctuary, a boundary. The Varelians didn't know what to make of it at first, a place where youth could come and listen, not to doctrine, not to lectures, but to a human who told stories of Earth. Real ones. He spoke of the cities before they burned, of the bridges that collapsed, of the people who survived with their bare hands, with kindness as often as fire. He did not hide what happened. He described the siege of New Mumbai in clinical detail to anyone who asked. The hunger, the hallucinations from dehydration, the sound of bones snapping when the overhead dome failed, the silence afterward. And then he said this: peace is not the absence of violence, it's the presence of memory, sharp enough to stop us before we repeat the same mistake. Some cried, some left, some listened again. He never forced them to stay. When he turned 29, Thalen visited for the final time. The old instructor's steps were slow, his crystalline joints creaking slightly under Lissar's gravity. But he did not need help. He had trained himself not to. They sat under the dome's curved ceiling, the stars wheeling silently above. You did what none of us could, Eli, Thalen said softly. You made us survive. Eli didn't look away from the sky. I made you dangerous again. Thalen paused. You say that like it's shameful. It is. They sat in silence for a time. The young ones idolize you, Thalen said. Some of the older ones resent you, but they all remember. Eli exhaled slowly. Then my work is done. Thalen tilted his head. And what will you do? I'll leave. The Varelian blinked. Where? Somewhere the war didn't reach, if such a place still exists. Thalen was quiet. Eli stood, stretching the stiffness from his back. His hands, long since healed from that first battle, still bore faint marks, scars he never had regrown, even though he could have. You raised me to understand logic, he said. You taught me restraint, discipline, the value of stillness. I tried, Thalen said. Eli turned toward him, eyes softer now. You did better than try. You gave me peace long enough to remember what to do when it broke. They did not embrace. That wasn't the Virelian way. But Thalen reached out, placed a hand on Eli's shoulder, a gesture older than culture. Eli let it stay. Then he packed his things. A small bag. One data module. A patch from his jacket, the original one, that still bore the burn from when he had been 6 years old. No weapons. No uniform. Just memory. His departure was not announced. No procession, no broadcast, no farewell address. His ship, a modified Terran Varelian hybrid, powered up at dawn and lifted silently over the glacial rim. It paused just long enough to transmit a single message. You wanted peace, keep it, don't make me come back. The message was archived in the Central Library, flagged with diplomatic significance, and added to the permanent historical record. They didn't understand if it was a promise or a threat. Most believed it was both. Decades passed. Children across the galaxy grew up studying his campaigns. His tactics became required reading. His doctrine of fear was softened into the doctrine of preparedness. The white circle symbol, human in origin, alien in message, remained. In time, the Council evolved. So did the Varelians. They became stronger, more complex, more self-aware. And though they never forgot him, they stopped waiting for his return. Because he had already given them the only thing he truly could. Survival. Not through conquest. Not through command. But by proving that peace was not a state. It was a choice. One that must be defended. One that must be remembered. One that could be taught. And in doing so, they finally understood what he had meant, all those years ago when he asked, "If I learn your ways, will you send for the others?" He hadn't meant his family. He had meant his species. And, without knowing it, they had. They had raised a human. And he had made them ready. 50 years later, there was a rumor. A listening post in the Antares Drift, unmanned, built for passive data collection, detected a ship signature that matched no known registry. It drifted silently, just beyond the edge of mapped space, hugging the gravitational lip of a collapsed dwarf star. No ID beacon, no emissions, just one clean, stable energy profile. Its transponder pinged once, then vanished. The Council archived the event without public notice. Because they knew. And they remembered. By then, Lisser Prime was unrecognizable. Gone were the delicate towers of untouched crystal. In their place rose layered cities. Not brutal, not ugly, but practical, built for both grace and resilience. Walkways reinforced. Transit powered by hybrid pulse cores developed from human models. Every building capable of shielding in under 4 seconds. The capital no longer smelled of perfumed gas. It smelled of activity, oil, heated ceramic, breath. And beneath it all, always, memory. The Grand Academy of Lissar, once a place of gentle inquiry, had expanded into 2 separate institutions. One for science. One for survival. Both bore Eli Graves' name. It wasn't decoration. It wasn't hero worship. The students studied his failures just as much as his victories. He had not been perfect. He had left damage. In rebuilding their defenses, he had broken their illusions. In teaching them fear, he had sacrificed innocence. Some of the elders resented that to the end of their long lives. But none could say it hadn't saved them. Once a year, on the date of the Drovek surrender, the observatory dome at the southern pole was open to the public. It remained untouched otherwise. Inside were no medals, no armor. Only a chair. A single photograph, encased in transparent gel glass. And the last words Eli Graves had spoken to the council, recorded from his final debrief: "Don't be proud that I won. Be ashamed it was necessary. And never let it be necessary again." They were engraved into the wall behind the chair. Children read them in silence. Instructors gave no lectures inside the dome. It was not a place for noise. It was for looking up into the sky and remembering who they had been and what it had cost to survive. 10 more years passed. Then 20. The war faded from daily conversation. A generation rose who had never known the burn of invasion, the panic of orbital alarms, the cold silence before a tactical order. And still, the council kept the protocols Eli had written. Redundant systems. Civilian readiness drills. The white circle insignia on every command structure. They never expected to use them. But they never forgot why they existed. It was on the 72nd anniversary of the peace doctrine's signing that the final message came. An encrypted stream reached the LISAR archives during the solar eclipse, a data burst so tightly coded, it bypassed standard filters and lit up only one terminal. The terminal in the Hall of Memory. It activated the moment the sun vanished behind the planet's outer ring. A single voice played. Older now, rougher, but unmistakable. Eli Graves. Authorization 4 Delta Black. I'm recording this from Sector Null 2. I won't say where that is. You'll find it when you're ready. A pause. The sound of wind. Real Terran wind, not synthetic atmosphere. I found what's left of Earth. The recording stilled. Then continued. It's not a home anymore, but it's not dead. Just resting. He took a breath. I didn't leave because I was angry. I left because I knew I was the last bridge, between the fire that raised me and the peace you hoped to build. Another pause. You held the peace. That matters. You earned what I could never give myself. A long silence. Then, I won't be coming back. Static crackled gently. Not interference, intentional. But if you ever forget what survival costs, if you ever soften so much you no longer feel the blood under your skin, then come find me. Click. End. The message deleted itself, not by virus, by design. It left behind no file, only memory. No one ever confirmed his death. There was no grave, no funeral, no monument on Earth. What was left of his species had long since scattered, assimilated, or vanished. But his lessons endured. Every Varelian child learned the 3 core axioms of his doctrine by heart. Peace is only sacred if it is defended. Strength is not cruelty. It is remembering how to end what others begin. Mercy is the hardest weapon to hold. In time, other species joined the alliance. Some brought new technology, others brought scars, a few brought more war. The Virelians never started it. But they never lost again. Because they had once raised a human. And in doing so, had learned the cost of forgetting how to fight. In the furthest reach of unmapped space, near a collapsed star, astronomers occasionally detect a faint thermal anomaly. Too small to be a ship, too stable to be debris. No one investigates. No one dares. Because the galaxy already knows. Eli Graves was not an accident. He was the answer to a question no one wanted to ask. What happens when you raise a human to be peaceful and teach him why peace matters? You don't get safety. You get someone who can build safety, defend it, and walk away from it. Because he knows what it cost. And what it's still worth.